Anyone else need to get in? No. So far, so good. Okay. Okay, folks. Good evening once again. I have a couple of new people here tonight. Welcome. We were going to speak about the battles of Jacob, the spiritual battles of Jacob. Now, there's many, many more things that happened in his life that were, you could call unfortunate incidents or, things that he had to, issues that he had to deal with, certainly. But I just want to talk about the battles for the time being and the reason that they were necessary. Okay, so everybody knows, well, I assume everybody knows by now, that there are basically 5 worlds. There are 5 worlds. What does it mean that there are 5 worlds? It means that there's 5 limited planes of reality, even though some of the planes of reality compared with this lowest plane of reality in which we exist. Some of those planes of reality would be regarded by us as infinite, but truly infinite, in other words, compared with the Or Ein Sof, they're not infinite, they're finite in some way or another. There is some kind of limitation. So there are 5 worlds, and from top to bottom, they're called Adam Kadmon is the first world. Then the world of Atzilut, the world of Bria, the world of Yetzira, and the world of Asiya. If anyone wants a chart of the worlds for after the class, we can certainly I can get you one. I can send it to your email. Just drop me an email. Worlds or planes of reality. Here we are. I'm going to put one up. More people in the waiting room. I don't know how this works, but there we go. Okay. All right. Let's see. Planes of reality here. Yeah. All right. So there's. Let me share screen. Share screen. Why is it not working? Share screen. There we go. No, yeah, that's the screen. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, I hope everybody can see that now. And then I've shared the screen. There's the worlds or the planes of reality. There's after the Tzimtzum, there's the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, right? There's the Or Ein Sof. Then there's the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is the concealment of the Or Ein Sof. Doesn't mean that the Or Ein Sof has been removed anywhere. It's still there. It's just in a state of concealment. And the first world, therefore, is called Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon, in Hebrew, Adam Kadmon as well. It's a primordial world. You could, so to speak, call it a meta world. Yeah, that's the expression I used over here. It's the world that doesn't exist in terms of regular existence. It's the world of potential. It's the world of absolute potential. Then there's the world of emanation, or the world of Atzilut, the second world down. It's also called the world of proximity, the world of closeness. It's also a world which is, even though it's already the second level down, it's nevertheless a world of perfection. It doesn't need any tikkun, it doesn't need any rectification. Then you start having the worlds, the lower 3 worlds, the manifested worlds. The world of Atzilut is not a manifested world in the same way as the world of Bria. In other words, the world of Atzilut is the world of all light, essentially. It's the world of emanation of light. Whereas even though there's lights and vessels over there, but the vessels are also in a state of oneness with the light, with their source. And therefore not manifested worlds. The first manifested world is the world of Bria, which is sometimes called the world of creation or the world of being. It's the first world of the 3 worlds of creation. Now, creation goes in 3 stages. It's first of all the initial creation, and then there is the formation of that creation, the world of formation. That's the world of Yetzira. And finally, the world of Asiya, the world of action, or the world of matter, the physical world, is the lowest aspect of the world of Asiya. These are all spiritual worlds, except the last one, Asiya, has a physical counterpart. They're all spiritual worlds, but they're nevertheless limited worlds. The world of Bria, the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya are worlds of limitation. Now, those 3 worlds, the last 3, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya over here, these worlds over here, those worlds are worlds that require tikkun in one way or another. They require some kind of rectification. Now, the rectification in each of these worlds is going to be a different type of rectification. Why? Because since it's a higher world, it it needs. Let me sort of give an example of this. Um, when you're eating a fruit, let's say, right? You're eating a banana. Now, most people don't eat bananas with the skin on, so the first sort of rectification of the banana to make it ready to eat is you have to take off the outer skin, right? The banana after that doesn't really need any more rectification than that. But let's say something else, for example, an onion, for example, right? So most people, I don't think, eat onions just by taking the skin off and eating it like that. I doubt it. But an onion needs more rectification than a banana. Onion, you have to take off the skin, and then you have to cook it one way or another. Usually you chop it up as well, but nevertheless, it has to be cooked, and only then can it be eaten. Okay, so there's various stages for different things. There's different stages of rectification, of purification. Um, Similar things would be with all kinds of foods which need some kind of rectification and preparation and so on and so forth. Some need more, some need less. Okay, so all of these worlds need some sort of rectification, and we can discuss the types of rectification that they all require. Admit. There's some more people waiting to get in. Okay, sorry about that. Let me just make sure that everybody's in here. All right, fine. Yeah. Okay, so these three worlds then are the worlds that require, as we said, require tikkun. Okay. Now, what does the tikkun in every world? Let me point out another idea, another important idea. First of all, we need a new share screen here. Where are we? New share. Okay, here we are. Are you seeing the whiteboard, anybody? No, I don't have your. Let's see here. Sorry about this. Chat. You seeing the whiteboard? Yes. Okay, good. All right, so we don't need to know anymore. That's fine. Okay, so now there's three levels. I'm sorry. There are 5 levels of soul. 5 levels of the soul. In other words, 5 levels of consciousness. Corresponding to the 5 worlds, would be 5 levels of consciousness, or they're called the 5 levels of soul. Let me just see if I have a ready-made document. I'll just make it easier. Soul and worlds. Yeah, there we go. I got it. Okay. Forget about it. I'm not going to use this. I'll just show you what it says on the screen here. Sorry, I know I should prepare these things beforehand. Usually I'm not ready. Okay, so there's worlds. Here's the world. Again, the world of Adam Kadmon, or Ak for short. The world of Atzilut, the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. Corresponding to them are the 5 levels of soul. We'll read the middle one in a second, right? The 5 levels of soul. The first one being the highest level of soul, being the level which is called Yechida. That's the innermost dimension of the soul, or the highest level of consciousness, which is called God consciousness, right? That would correspond to the world of Adam Kadmon. Then you have the level of Chaya, the next level of soul down, the next level down, which is called purpose consciousness. In other words, one is aware of one's purpose in the world and what it is that you're supposed to be doing here. Why are you here? Your why is found in your Chaya. That corresponds to the world of Atzilut. Now, these are the lower levels of the world, lower levels of worlds, lower levels of consciousness, and lower levels of soul. Neshama corresponds to Bria, Ruach to Yetzirah, Nefesh to Asiya, Neshama is intellectual consciousness, ruach, emotional consciousness, nefesh, physical consciousness, awareness of the body, and so on. Now, why is all of this important? These, just as these three worlds need tikkun, so too these three levels of neshama are the ones that do the tikkun. These are the levels that do the tikkun. What does tikkun mean? Tikkun means rectification, okay? There's rectification. What's the rectification? The rectification is to connect godliness to the world and the world to godliness. How is that done? Through souls. Like souls are the in-between, they're the go-between. They're the middle level that connect worlds to godliness. In other words, the world of Asiya, even though these worlds are being created, they were created, obviously they were created by the Almighty, they were created by God. Nevertheless, because they were already created, therefore there's some distance, so to speak, between them and godliness. In the world of Atzilut, there is no distance. The world of Atzilut is the world of oneness, the world of godliness, right? But the world of Bria, the world of creation, through the process of creation, there's some distance. The world of formation is even more distant, and the world of action, the world that's around us, the spiritual counterpart of this physical world, is even more distant. Therefore, there has to be three aspects of connection. These three aspects of connection are through the neshama, ruach, and nefesh. And starting from below, it will be nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Now, there are, okay, now I'm going to have to, use the whiteboard. I hope you can see it all. If anyone can't see the whiteboard, just drop me a message. Okay, so there are three levels of rectification. Three levels of rectification, which are called, let's just see if we can mute everybody. Mute everybody. No, don't allow anybody to ask. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. Here we go. There are three levels of rectification. Three levels of rectification, which are called, let me just, I'll write it in, I'll just write it in English. I could write it in Hebrew, but they called, sorry, the lowest one is called Hachna'a. Hachna'a. Hachna'a means subjugation. All right, Hachna'a. And then comes Havdalah. Havdalah is separation. Sorry, writing with a, I didn't connect my writing device, which I should have, I know, but I didn't. I sometimes have to disconnect it because I don't have enough ports to be able to have it connected all the time. I forgot to connect it before. Anyway, Hachna'a is again subjugation. Yeah, that's subjugation. Havdalah is separation. So there's Hachna'a, subjugation, Havdalah, separation. And then the final level is called Hamtaka. Hamtaka means literally sweetening. Hamtaka. You put an A on the end or just an H, whatever this stuff. That's sweetening, right? So again, subjugation, separation, sweetening. Hachna'a, Havdalah, Hamtaka. All right. Now we can start to talk about the various battles of Esau, of Jacob. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, and I should have mentioned, is that the order of Hachna'a, Havdalah, Hamtaka usually goes in that order, but not always. It usually goes in that order. In other words, first subjugation, then separation, and then sweetening. Complete rectification. Sweetening is already complete rectification. But it doesn't always go like that. In some circumstances, the proper order is separation and then subjugation and then sweetening. Why is it like that? Because it depends on what it is that is being sweetened. Yeah, it depends on what it is that needs to be rectified, ultimately to be sweetened. It depends on what it is. If this thing is dangerous, then the first step is separation, not subjugation. Now, let me just explain this terminology a little bit, because I don't want you to get confused as to. It's a good question here. What's up with folks who seem to create difficulties in theirs and others' lives that seem to be an opportunity for others to grow from? Is that creating an opportunity for tikkun? It can be, definitely. In other words, it depends on how you look at it. Depends to a large extent on how you look at it. If one faces challenges as things that are attempting to uproot you and things that are attempting to destroy you, then you're going to have a very different attitude towards them, towards those challenges. If what as you are suggesting over here, you treat a challenge of one sort or another as an opportunity to get higher. In fact, there was one of the very famous rebbes, Hasidic rebbes, Hasidic saintly tzaddikim from a few generations ago, 4 generations ago actually. His name was Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch. He had a famous saying. He said, "Lechatchila ariber." Lechatchila ariber. From the beginning, I go over the top. In other words, I don't treat a problem by trying to avoid it, trying to go around it, trying to deal with it, trying to turn it into an enemy, into a friend, or whatever, that kind of thing. I don't bother doing it that way. From the beginning, I go over the top. In other words, I go to the source and I go above it, and I do everything from on a higher level, so to speak. And I think that's what Jacob was doing here too. In his battles, he learned to go for the highest level of things, and we'll see that shortly. But I hope that answers the question. Usually the opportunity that's presented by some kind of difficulty is an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to get to a higher level. And interestingly enough, this happens a lot with spouses. Spouses don't realize that they're partners. They put together in order for both of them to grow. Now, it sometimes happens that you marry the wrong person. That's not possible. That can happen. It's unfortunate, but that can for sure happen. The general situation, however, is that even though there may be difficulties, they could usually be worked out. And the difficulties are there in order to cause you to grow as a person and cause the other person to grow as well. All right. Yeah, every stressful event is an excuse me, is an opportunity for growth. Yeah, that is correct. Okay, so let's go back to our original discussion, which was the discussion of Jacob and how his battles were fought and what he was doing, what these battles are all about, and why they're all spiritual battles. So what Jacob was doing was he was doing the work of Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Hamtakah. Hachna'ah, again, subjugation, Havdalah, separation, and Hamtakah, sweetening. However, the first battle that he fought was really with his own brother, right? With his own brother. Initially, that battle was in the womb. The verse tells us that within the womb of his mother, of Rebecca, within the womb, he and his brother struggled. The sages put it like this: whenever they went past a house of worship, Jacob struggled to get out or struggled to gain domination. Whenever they went past a house of idolatry, Esau struggled to gain domination. But they were fighting, so to speak, in the womb, and eventually the one who was born first was Esau. So that was in a sense, but when Jacob was born, he was born holding on to Esau's heel. In other words, he was restraining him. So that is in a sense Hachna'ah, that's already subjugation. He was attempting to subjugate him. However, we don't really count that particular because they were as yet not even born. And even when they were born, although Jacob was holding on to the heel of Esau, that can't be counted as proper restraint and a proper battle in that sense, because there was no consciousness involved. They were in the womb, right? It was just sort of a natural tendency. Okay, so when they grew up, as you know, their mother Rivka saw that her son Esau, or Esau in Hebrew, was not the right person to take the birthright, even though he was born first. He was not the right person to take the birthright because the birthright meant spiritual service of some sort or another. But that's what it meant. It meant the spiritual service ultimately would be the spiritual service of the inheritance of Abraham and Isaac, which would be the spiritual service of the Jewish people. These were the three progenitors, the three patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Rachel, and Leah. These were the patriarchs and matriarchs. And it was Jacob that carried the torch forward, not Esau. Esau wasn't capable of doing that. He needed rectification. So it was later on, after Jacob took the blessings with his mother's blessing, he took the blessings, and there was a whole, we're not going to discuss it now, but he took the blessings. Esau wanted to kill him. He wanted to kill him. So the first action as an adult, really, that Jacob had to do was not hachna'ah, subjugation, but havdalah. He had to run away. His mother told him, go to my brother Laban, and there just stay until it's safe to come back. And he stayed away for a very long time, 20 years. But in any event, eventually he came back. But the first level then of birur, of rectification in his case, was separation. To put himself in a situation where he was separated from his previous situation. Now, this is sometimes a very positive approach and a very necessary approach in our own lives. For example, if we're in, let's say, some kind of environment where there's an extremely negative environment surrounding us, and you feel that you're unable to deal with it, you're unable to stand on your own 2 feet up against it. So sometimes the best solution, and of course it's, one shouldn't do things on the spur of the moment. It should be done with advice and with proper consideration. But maybe in some cases the best thing to do is to separate oneself from that kind of behavior. I'll give you an example. One of the unfortunate phenomena in our times is drugs and alcohol. I mean, alcohol has been going on for many years, but drugs is a very unfortunate phenomenon. And usually people who are addicted to the drugs have to go cold turkey, as far as I'm aware. They have to go cold turkey in order to stop. They have to separate themselves from it completely because there's no partially taking a drug. It might be that they have to have some medication to get them over the withdrawal symptoms and so on and so forth. But in order to stop heroin and other very addictive drugs, there has to be havdalah. There has to be a complete separation. This can sometimes happen, unfortunately, in a marriage as well. If the marriage situation is dangerous, so that physical harm may accrue to one of the parties, then sometimes the best thing to do is just separate, right? Separate and get divorced. Sometimes that's the best thing. But in any event, sometimes in a situation, the best way to deal with a situation, one's in bad company, you have bad friends, you have friends that are leading you to do the wrong things, you have friends that are encouraging you to, let's say, I don't know, do things that go against the principles with which you were brought up, or against the principles of your religion, or against the principles of just decency and humanity, and you can't handle it. So you have to separate yourself from those people. Sometimes the first step is separation of yourself from the influence that is attempting to change you into something that you don't want to be. Okay, that's number one. Then comes the second battle that Jacob had, his battle with Laban, which was Hachna'ah. In his particular case, it went in the order of Havdalah, separation first from his brother. Then Hachna'ah is subjugation. He had to subdue in order to extract the sparks of holiness from um, from Laban and from everything that belonged to him in order to extract those sparks. So this was a process of subduing. He had to be present. He had to be there, and his whole stay with Laban, which was for 20 years, was in order to rectify and elevate the sparks of holiness that were there. How did those sparks of holiness get there in the first place? Well, in the process of creation, the process of creation of the worlds, there was a world, a previous form of creation, which is called the world of Tohu. As I'm sure everybody is familiar with. It's spoken about it a few times. The world of Tohu, the world of chaos. Right in the beginning of creation, it says like this: Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. V'ha'aretz hata tohu vavohu. The earth was waste and void. It was waste and void. In other words, that was a form of creation that was meant to only exist temporarily, exist in a stable fashion temporarily, and then it broke apart, and all the sparks of holiness then fell down into lower levels. They fell down into the world of some fell into the world of Atzilut, but they were absorbed immediately. Some fell into the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the three lower worlds. And our task is to elevate those sparks, right? Elevating those sparks is what is called Avodat HaBirurim, the work of sifting and elevating the sparks, sifting them out of the situation they're in, and then eventually elevating them. And that's the work of Hachna'ah. Hachna'ah is to subdue the negativity and extract the positivity. And that's what he was doing when he was spending all of his time with Laban. He was extracting the sparks that existed with Laban, and he was elevating them. Eventually, they came back with him to the land of Israel, and without getting into it too much, that has to do with when he made the sheep that Laban gave him to look after as part of their eventual agreement in the last few years that he worked for him, the last 6 years that he worked for him. When he was going to leave, after 14 years, he was going to leave, and then Laban encouraged him to stay and so on, and the agreement was that he would give him his own flocks. Anyway, what he was doing is he would make him akudim, nikudim, and vrudim. In other words, he was using the powers of the world of unification, the world of akudim, nikudim, the power of the world of separation, nikudim, which is the world of Tohu, and Brudim, the world of Atzilut. He was using all of these three planes of reality in order to extract the sparks and return them to their original pristine condition. Okay, so that's the process of Hachna'ah. So Ernest asked, was Laban more at ease with disclosing himself once Yaakov becomes submerged in his work? Did he need to become part of his world? It wasn't that Laban was not easy with Jacob, it was the other way around. Jacob was not so easy with being with Laban, because Laban was a very deceitful and he was very deceitful, and he wasn't a straight guy. He was trying to think of the other word. He was wily. He was deceitful. He was crafty, and to the extent that he gave Jacob the wrong wife. Jacob had agreed with him that he would work with him for 7 years to marry Rachel, and he worked for 7 years. And then at the marriage ceremony, as you know, in Jewish man in marriage ceremonies, and apparently at that time too, the woman's face was covered, and he took his bride home and discovered in the morning that it was Leah, not Rachel. Um, so, um, yeah, he was conniving. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, he was a conniving guy. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yael asked, what did Jacob do with the sparks that were taken back? Where did he deposit them? That's a very good question, Yael. He deposited them on a higher level of spirituality. They weren't yet completely rectified. They had to wait for the giving of the Torah to be completely rectified, but they were taken up to a higher spiritual level. And then eventually, once we had gotten the Torah, it was possible to do the next stage, which is the stage of Hamtakah. What happens in the stage of Hamtakah? This is where Jacob leaves, eventually he leaves Laban, and starts going back towards the Holy Land, towards Israel. And then Esau comes out to meet him again. Esau comes out to not to greet him, but to fight against him. And here Jacob has to do what is called hamtaka, right? He had to mamtik, he had to take the severities of Esau and turn them against him in order to sweeten him completely. In any event, the process of sweetening is the third stage in the process. After that, they actually became, they were no longer enemies. Esau no longer wanted to kill him. That's the stage of Hamtakan. Now, how does this work in our lives? Well, it's possible to subdue people, and it's possible to stay away from them. Just to give an example of people who are negative influences in our lives, it's possible to stay away from them. It's also possible to subdue them. In other words, not to let them have influence over us. Um, that means subjugation. You subdue them in the sense that that you kind of overpower their influence on you, and you don't accept their negative influence. But the best, obviously, is hamtaka, to change the enemy into a friend. Now, this process of hamtaka is not so easy. How do you do the hamtaka? What's the process of finding transforming the person, not just subjugating them, but transforming them? How do you transform? What's called in the Zohar is hapcha, right? To transform something. How do you find it? How do you transform something into a friend, whereas before it was an enemy? Well, the process of hachna'ah, we know what Havdalah is, but the process of hachna'ah is when you're pushing away the evil, you're pushing away the negativity. In the process of hamtakah, you bring out the good, you bring out the godliness. As soon as one can see godliness, a spark of godliness in a negative situation, that's already started to sweeten that situation and rectify it to the extent that the situation itself can be completely transformed. The story, which is relevant at this time of the year, it's just before the 19th of Kislev. The 19th of Kislev is the day of liberation of the first Chabad Rebbe from prison. He was imprisoned on false charges of um, sedition and rebellion against the state and so on and so forth. And it was proven, obviously, that this was all nonsense. Anyway, he was let out, and the day that he was let out was the 19th of Kislev. 19th of Kislev, very important day in the Hasidic calendar. It's in fact called the New Year of Hasidut, of Hasidic philosophy, so to speak. Okay, so what's one of the stories? A very well-known story, but I'll repeat it anyway. When he was in prison, one of the prison guards was an intelligent man and a man who studied Bible. He was, I wouldn't say he was a biblical scholar, but but he certainly studied, and he believed in the biblical events and so on. He believed in the Bible. He believed in God. So he asked the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe is the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya. So he asked him, yeah, I'll get your question in a minute. The He asked him why it was when it says that after the sin of Adam, God calls out to Adam and says, Ayeka, where are you? So he asked Alter Rebbe, what we're talking about God, what God didn't know where he was. He didn't know where Adam was. Um, so the Alter Rebbe answered him, the idea is that when a person reaches a certain age, and he actually specified the age of this person exactly, when a person reaches the age of 54, this was the prison guard, when a person reaches the age of 54, that was how old he was, it's time for him to start asking himself, Ayeka. God is asking him, where are you? Where are you up to? What have you achieved so far? What is your goal for your remaining years? Where are you going? He didn't. It's not that he didn't know that God didn't know where he was. He was giving Adam a challenge. Now that you've sinned, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to rectify it? Where are you now? Before you were in the Garden of Eden, you were in a state of heightened spirituality, in a state of heightened consciousness of godliness, and now you don't have that anymore. Where are you? What are you going to do? What's your mission now in life? Now, you could ask the question, well, why didn't God just tell him what his mission was? Because that's not the point. The point is not to be told what to do. The point is to come to a realization of what it is that I must do independently of being told. Little children, you tell things, tie your shoelaces, put on a coat, it's cold outside, eat breakfast. An adult shouldn't need to be told what to do, and an adult has to discover for himself what he has to do. And then it's much more truthful for that person, it's much more real, and it's much more valuable because of without without the realization, without thinking about where am I, without that realization, if one simply spoon fed, then you become a robot. You're not an independently acting creature. You're just a robot. You're following instructions. You might as well just be a chess engine. You didn't do anything in your life if you're waiting for instructions all the time from somebody else or from above. You have to discover. It's a process of discovery, self-discovery to a large extent, but a process of discovery of what it is that I need to do in this world and how am I doing in my mission. Okay, that is the process of hamtaka. Hamtaka is finding the godliness in the situation. So when the Alter Rebbe expressed the godliness in the situation, shortly after that he was released. Even though he was in a terrible situation in prison where it looked like he was going to be tried for treason, as soon as he gave that answer, there are those that say, by the way, that the prison guard was actually the Tsar who was coming to interrogate the prisoner himself. It was actually the Tsar, the Russian Tsar, who supposedly was being rebelled against by this man in prison. In any event, that was the stage of Hamtaka. He sweetened up the whole thing by recognizing the godliness in the situation. The same is true in our own lives. Either we see a godliness in a certain situation, or we see the godliness, the spark of godliness in ourselves. Now, I'm not saying, God forbid, I'm not saying that a person is God. I'm saying that all of us have a spark of godliness in ourselves, godliness. That's called the highest level of the soul, the yechida, the level of yechida of the soul, is a spark of godliness. It's part of God above, so to speak, as it says in Tanya in the second chapter. That spark, that divine spark within us, is within everybody. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. If there was no divine spark in you, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't exist. The fact that you are here and that you do exist means that you have a certain mission, you have a spark of godliness to recognize and to release it and to elevate that spark of godliness into higher levels of consciousness, into higher levels of activity, into higher levels of awareness is what we're doing or supposed to be doing in this world. Let me just address a question here. What about the sparks that were in Egypt? Were these the sparks that were in Egypt that were taken out of Egypt by Moses? Some of them were already on a higher level of sparks that also came out with the Jewish people. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they left with 202 of the 288 sparks. There were originally 288 major sparks, they left with 202. Now, those 202 sparks were then elevated. Most of them were elevated at the time of the giving of the Torah and the building of the tabernacle. Most of them were elevated, but they left 86 behind. What happened to the ones at Jacob? There's actually a discussion about this. One of the discussions is that when he went back down to Egypt with his sons in the time of Joseph, he took those sparks with him into Egypt. Others of the opinion that they were just remained on sort of in a higher level banking system, so to speak, a higher order of spiritual reality, and had to be elevated from there to an even higher level. So the three wars, therefore, that Jacob fought, the first one by running away from his brother Esau, the second one by rectifying the flocks and so on and so forth of Laban, the elevating of the sparks, and eventually the transformation of Esau into someone who at least wasn't an enemy. He might not have been his friend, but he wasn't an enemy anymore. That would be Havdalah. Those were the three major battles that Jacob fought, and he won them, and therefore his name was changed. His name was changed from Yaakov to Israel, to Yisrael. And the reason for the name Israel is Kisarisa im Elokim va'anashim va'tuchal. You struggled with man and with God, and you succeeded. You struggled with man and with God, and you succeeded. What was your struggle against man? Well, that was the outside circumstances. And with God, what was the struggle with God? To bring out the godliness of every situation. And that's how it becomes rectified. When you can see the godliness in a situation, you can see that God knew what he was doing. He put the situation here for a reason, and for me to be able to do something about it, for me to be able to do something positive, for me to be able to change the situation into a godly, a negative situation, into a positive, and eventually into a godly situation. That is the proper type of birur. That is what we're aiming to do in elevating the sparks. And the paradigm for that, again, is Jacob. All right. Question. All right. No other questions? Anyone typing? All righty. I'm not sure about having a class next week. I'm not sure about having a class next week because I think next week is Hanukkah. 1 second, let me just see if I have a calendar. Here we go. Yes, we still use these old types of calendars every now and then. Let's see here. All right. Yeah. Next Thursday night is Hanukkah. So we will not have a class next Thursday night, or the one after that for that, because I spend time with family. So, all right. Do we have an example of one of the rectified sparks? Oh, 1 second. There were questions that came before. Oh, very good. Okay. All right. These sparks. What are these sparks? These sparks are sparks of things. What? Let me just explain what the sparks are. The sparks are aspects of holiness that became embedded in impurity. They're holiness that's embedded in impurity, and it has to be what they call disencumbered. It has to be separated from the impurity and then elevated. So the process of separation from impurity and the elevation, there's three stages. First of all, the darkness of the negativity, the evil qualities have to be pushed away. That's called hachna'ah, right? They have to start to be pushed away. Then the spark of holiness has to be separated from that background of impurity, that original host, which is impure. And then it has to be extracted and brought back into holiness. That would be called hamtaka. So there's hachna'ah, the subjugation of evil, the separation between good and evil, and then there's the elevation of the good into a higher good, returning it to its original source. I hope that that helps. All right. An example of one of the rectified sparks. I think there's many examples of the rest of the rectified sparks. All of the prophets were rectified sparks. All the holy saintly tzaddikim, holy saintly people are rectified sparks. Anything that was part of the temple was a rectified spark. Anything that becomes part of holiness even in our world is a spark that's on the way to rectification. Not necessarily fully rectified yet, but it's on its way. Okay, thank you very much, Wendy. You're welcome, everybody. Since Adam, we all recognize that spark of Hawaii from his breath until now, until we realize his personal will and rectify our tikkun. Yes. Yes, perfect. Jethro was a rectified spark. Absolutely. Definitely. No question about that. Since Adam okay, we said that. Did Laban then become more pure, or did Jacob receive the spark and Laban get worse? We don't hear about him afterwards. So what we do know is that when Jacob left, he basically took all the sparks with him, and then they put a barrier up between them. They built a wall, yeah, to prevent the only with agreement of both parties would they be able to ever come together. So Laban's probably just became worse, I imagine. If it's possible to become worse as Laban, I don't know, but but that's what happened. Yes, the sparks in each and every person has their consciousness and their sparks that they have to rectify. Is it possible to expand on this topic? You mean the topic of rectifying the sparks? You mean as Laban reincarnated as Bilam? Yeah, maybe. I don't know if it'll be a full class, but if you wouldn't mind dropping me an email, just reminding me, because it's been a couple of weeks at least before we get to it, so probably 3 weeks. So just drop me, in a few weeks, an email, and I'll talk about that. Okay. All right, folks.